Dải đất uốn cong hình chữ S nằm hiền hòa bên bờ Thái Bình Dương mà chúng ta hãnh diện gọi là giang sơn gấm vóc của dòng giống Việt Nam. Tổ tiên ta đã tự cường chống ngoại xâm, đồng thời từng bước mở rộng bờ cõi, men theo bờ biển và đồng bằng tràn xuống phía Nam. Bao nhiêu gian khổ nhọc nhằn, trải qua 4 triều đại Lý Trần Lê Nguyễn mới hoàn tất công cuộc Nam tiến, để có ngày nay mở ra con đường cái quan từ Bắc chí Nam, từ Hải Nam Quan xuống vùng Cà Mau. Theo dấu chân xưa, ta thử bắt đầu hành trình xuyên Việt, khởi từ đất Bắc để thấy rõ những nét đặc thù đáng yêu của ba miền đất nước mà tiệu chung vẫn là một nhà Việt Nam bất diệt. Nắm tay xây đắp Sơn Hà, Bắc Trung Nam mãi một nhà Việt Nam.
2019 Asia Pacific Conference at Ton Duc Thang University, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam today. The conference is a great opportunity that brings together the world's leading scientists, researchers, scholars, and professionals in the financial sector. It's a forum for presenting research results, discussing current issues in financial management and other related topics. And today, we are honored to welcome all distinguished guests, professors, and scientists from all around the world. To represent the conference committee, we would like to introduce Professor Lê Vinh Danh, Ton Duc Thang University, Vietnam, Conference Program Co-Chair. We would like to introduce Professor Rajesh Narayanan, Louisiana State University, US, Conference Program Co-Chair. We would like to introduce Professor Andrei Simonov, Michigan State University, US, Conference Program Co-Chair. We would like to introduce Professor Gordon Phillips, Dartmouth College, Keynote Speaker. We would like to introduce Dr. Võ Hồng Lan, Ton Duc Thang University, Vietnam, Conference Academic Co-Chair. To represent the organizing committee, we would like to introduce Ms. Michelle Louis, Executive Director, Financial Management Association International. We would like to introduce Dr. Hoàng Cẩm Trang, Dean, Faculty of Finance and Banking, Ton Duc Thang University, Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, it is also our great honor to welcome all distinguished guests who are representatives of universities in Vietnam, experts, researchers, lecturers from USA, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, France, India, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Japan, Republic of Korea, and Singapore. Representatives of Orient Commercial Joint Stock Bank, OCB, Saigon Joint Stock Commercial Bank, SCB, Asia Commercial Bank, ACB, CFA Institute Asia Pacific Research Exchange, ARX, China Stock Market and Accounting Research Database, CSMAR, FMA Vietnam, ICAEW Vietnam, the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, ACCA, and many of our partner enterprises. Representatives of State Bank of Vietnam, Vietnam Banks Association in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam Association of Financial Executives, experts, researchers, lecturers, and students of Ton Duc Thang University, and members of mass media who help us broadcast the event to the public. Your presence definitely brings the honor to our conference, and we would like to thank all of you. Thank you. And now, to begin the program, we would like to invite Professor Lê Vinh Danh, President of Ton Duc Thang University, Conference Program Co-Chair, on stage to deliver the opening remarks. Please, sir.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the conference organizer and Ton Duc Thang University, I am pleased to welcome you on to the 2019 FMA Asia Pacific Conference today. Ladies and gentlemen, in pursuant to the successful FMA conference organized by the leading university in Asia Pacific, Ton Duc Thang University is selected to be the venue of the 11th FMA Asia Pacific Conference. We find it a great honor, especially when this year the first FMA conference held in Vietnam has attracted hundreds of research papers from scientists worldwide and become one of the biggest FMA conferences in the Asia Pacific region for the past 11 years. Today, I am very happy to see such a large and diverse group of speakers and participants, many of whom who have traveled a long way to Vietnam and that reminds us just how important our work is. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is the leading conference in finance in Asia Pacific region, with the aim to bring together academicians and practitioners with interest in finance, as well as providing the beneficial forum for presenting new studies and discussing current issues in finance management and related topics. For Ton Duc Thang University, we consider this conference as one of our strategic activities to develop to a prestigious research university. For your information, Ton Duc Thang University is a dynamic higher education institution in Vietnam with 16 faculty and 1 college in different fields from science, engineering, technology to business and art. The university has around 25,000 students, and it is seen as one of the fastest growing universities in Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of PDTU, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the FMA Board of Directors in choosing us as the host institution of FMA 2019 Asia Pacific Conference. I am grateful to the conference participants, program committee, chair, co-chair, reviewer, keynote speakers, and sponsors around the world for their contribution to the success of the conference. It is my special thanks go out to Dr. Ronald Masulis, Vice President Program, Dr. Itak Khan Hassan, Vice President Global of FMA, and Michelle Louis, Executive Director of FMA, for their support for organizing the conference in Vietnam. Last but not least, I also would like to thank all staff for their hard work to make the conference successful. I believe this conference will be a meaningful and enjoyable experience to all of us. Finally, I hereby proud to declare the opening of the 2019 FMA Asia Pacific Conference. Thank you, and once again, I warmly welcome all of you.
Good morning, Vietnam. Okay, so welcome participants, welcome guests. This is 11th year we have Asia Pacific FMA Conference. It just happened to be one of the largest so far. 370 submissions, 150 plus papers, 117 participants already registered, and of course many students and TEDU staff and many other local guests. Thank you all for coming. We're going to have an exciting program. Standard sessions, we're going to have elevator pitch, we're going to have panel discussions on completely new subjects. It is going to be exciting. All right. This conference would not be possible without many people, a lot of you. So, members of program committee, I said 370 papers, right? Each paper was read at least by 2 members of a committee. It's a lot of reading. There is a wonderful FMA team with Michelle Louis in charge, who actually made the whole organization possible and seamless. It's amazing. Raghu Rao from Cambridge University, professor, he put together an excellent doctoral consortium, and I hope that PhD students who attended yesterday enjoyed it, and it was very useful. Gordon, my sincere thanks for coming a long way to make this conference even better. Now, and of course, all the participants, all presenters, all session chairs, all the discussants, thank you for doing your job. Now, last but not least, the local team, the President Lei, thank you so much. This is an exceptional organization. We are so excited to be here on this beautiful, amazing campus. Thank you. Thank you. Last but not least, thank you for sponsors. And I'm just going to name a few. CFA Institute Asia Pacific Research Exchange, GTA Finance and Education Group, CISMA, Orient Commercial Bank, Asia Commercial Bank. Thank you for making this conference possible. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Professor Gordon Phillips. Professor Phillips is the faculty director of the Center for Private Equity and Venture Capital and the Lawrence Whitmore Professor of Business Administration at Dartmouth College. His areas of research include corporate finance and how financial decisions impact firms' strategic decisions, and contracting in financial markets. His work in corporate finance includes studies of private equity issuance, capital structure, Chapter 11 bankruptcy, how leveraged buyouts take place, and other forms of high-tech influence of firms and rivals' investment decisions. He's also a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a visiting research professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing. His recent research has been published in the Journal of Political Economy and the Review of Financial Studies, and has been on applying computational linguistics to firm financial statements to analyze merger synergies, dividends, and product market competition. Some of his other research published in the Journal of Finance has been on real and financial booms and busts and mergers and acquisitions and how firms organize across multiple markets. He served as an associate editor at the Review of Financial Studies and Journal of Corporate Finance. I am very pleased to have Professor Phillips here to deliver the keynote speech. He's graciously offered a handout to accompany his task, to accompany his talk for your future reference. This should be in your registration packet to make it easy for you to follow. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Gordon Phillips.
Xin hao, Vietnam. Let me extend my great appreciation for this honor to give this talk and to visit this beautiful country. My first time in Vietnam, and I've had the amazing good fortune to visit first in Hanoi, then went to Da Nang and Hoi An, and now here in beautiful Ho Chi Minh City. I very much enjoyed the gracious hospitality of everyone, and it is truly an honor to be here and to give this talk. So again, my great appreciation to President Lei. Thank you so much for hosting us, and Ton Duc Thang University, beautiful campus, very, very impressive. Truly one of the gems of Asia. So it's very exciting to be here and to experience all the cultural and academic interaction with everyone. Thank you. So my talk today is going to be on an area which spans both economics and finance. And I think if you look, the title is right here, Industries in Competition, New Foundations in Corporate Finance, for Corporate Finance and Asset Pricing. Let me again extend the welcome, and I have a handout to go along with this that I distributed with the FMA, and then all these, this talk will also be on my website at Dartmouth College for future reference. If you look around the world today, I think the central theme is finance cannot operate in a vacuum. We cannot just worry about the cash flows and the money and the risk. We have to be broader, because it is truly the case that many legislatures, many countries are very worried about competition. They're worried about increased competition around the world and the effect it has on consumers. And they are now starting to regulate firms and fine firms for excessive concentration at the expense of consumers. And so this is an ongoing theme. I think we're seeing more and more work in finance recognizing the impact of competition, both on the risk firms face, but also on their cash flows going forward. So I know that I will jump into the talk, and then if I am not able to finish the entire talk, it again will be available on my website. I think the key thing is, I'll summarize the keynote first. My theme is that specifying industry structure and competitors is crucial. Fundamental to finance as well as economics. And economists have historically focused on competition, and I think this is going to be an increasing focus also as finance professors and finance practitioners. Competitors are not just benchmarks. Sometimes we think, okay, I want to do as well as my competitor. They're not just a benchmark. Firms choose financial policies, our capital structure policies, to influence interaction with each other. So and then as a practical matter, when you're running, as we do in finance, we use a lot of data. It's a data-oriented subject. And when you're running regressions, people many times put in an industry fixed effect or an industry dummy variable. One of the themes is that we can't just do this. We have to think about how the industry is impacting our financial policy. Industry competition is not just a control variable. We shouldn't just think of, we'll understand what's happening to the firms. We have to understand the competition they're facing. And this is true as we see throughout Asia, throughout the United States, throughout Europe. Firms, even when they have to do mergers, have to go before the competition authorities to get approval for the mergers. So regulators are increasingly examining competition and the effects on consumers. Competition is a fundamental state variable, this is my theme, which impacts viable governance structures. You'll have a different corporate governance system in different competition environments. It impacts viable compensation systems. How you're going to compensate the managers would be impacted by competition. A very large topic that we see spans both economics and finance. It impacts viable financing structures. If firms have too much debt and they're in a very competitive environment, we may, of course, see bankruptcies. We may see some adverse effects from having too much debt. And this has been a theme of other research. Again, competition matters for financing decisions. Competition matters for the risk and survival of firms. We see recently in the hyper-competition in venture capital that now in Asia, venture capital financings have actually surpassed U.S. venture capital financing. Especially in China, there's been a wave of venture capital financing. But at the same time, if you visited in China, and you see here, we see many new companies like Grab, we see Didi in China, and these competitors are very, very intense, and so many firms don't now make it. We see the bike-sharing companies. Some of them had actually received in China, received over 1 billion US dollars, about 7 billion RMB, and still failed. Still failed because they burned through the cash flow. So the background for this talk, as I said, is on the website, and I have we have some text, some data, which we, as finance professionals, would use frequently. So this is all available for free download. We're making this available. It's a Phillips data set, and we have industry data on similarities, fluidity, and concentration. We've recently updated 1996 to 2017. We'll be backfilling for 87 to 95, and we are actually going to be, within the next 2 years, making international versions available including in China, and maybe we'll add Vietnam as well. We'll have more Asian countries, but into these indices, and also having European-based versions of these data. So this is going to be truly a way to think about competition internationally. So if you look historically at what we focus on in finance, the focus of central problems in finance historically has been agency problems and asymmetric information. These are the central problems we worry about in finance for how firms get money. They have to worry about problems between claimants. We have to worry about asymmetric information, why in fact some small firms may not get financing, because if we do not know as an external financier how they are necessarily going to do in the future and know something about their assets. But not market coordination problems, which are the focus of industrial organization. So again, the central point I would be making is that cash flows, which are the focus of the above problems we've dealt with in finance, are fundamentally impacted by product market competition and industrial organization. Traditional finance, we have corporate finance investigates the failure of the Modigliani-Miller proposition. I'm sure in your classes, some of you in our seniors last year, from my understanding here, most are last year students. You've had the very famous propositions of Modigliani and Miller. Those we know are just a hypothetical scenario under which finance doesn't matter to corporate decisions and which we know it does. So we've historically tried to document the ways finance matters for firms, not just in terms of its money, but its risk and survival. In asset pricing, when we think of looking at stock markets around the world, prices are determined by firm risk relative to aggregate benchmark. But the firm's risk characteristics are independent of the actions of competitors, is the central assumption still being made. So again, typical corporate finance, we have interaction of financial and real decisions. So type A problems would be have a certain capital structure affects real decisions. The amount of debt affects the risk of investment. So when firms go get their financing, they have to get their debt, and this would affect the risk of the investment. We have a risk shifting problem we deal with frequently. Too much debt, we may take riskier projects. The amount of debt may affect the level of investment. We might have, with heavily indebted firms, we can see cases where they may invest not enough because of the debt overhang. They may invest, again, in excess of what they should because they are risk shifting. The debt overhang problem for Myers-Magellon, very famous Myers paper. The implication is that partial equilibrium inefficiencies will persist, though, given recontracting costs, or given the inability to observe information. And we have problems in contracting, agency problems or selection problems, giving asymmetric information. These give rise to investment inefficiencies, which can be fully or partially solved through optimal financial contracts, where we might get back to a first best or a better second best, given finance matters in a positive way. Central throughout this, even when we look at risk, is benchmarking. How risky are you relative to a competitor? We measure risk typically with a beta or a multiple beta model. We look at cash flows in the numerator. We try to figure out the net present value of a firm's investments. But we always say, how well does a firm perform? It's always relative to a competitor. Is this firm performing better? Do they have an excess alpha? Do they outperform if you're an investment manager? Or if you're a corporate finance individual or a corporate finance CEO, you would say, does my firm perform better than my competitor? But this doesn't really say, how does the competitor impact me? It just says, do I perform better than my competitor? Does the stock have a higher alpha than its risk-adjusted competitor? So we benchmark the firm with other firms, both in corporate finance and asset pricing. This critique of Larry Summers, past president of Harvard University, he had a very scathing critique of finance, in my opinion. The critique was that finance was just catch-up economics. What is ketchup economics? Ketchup is this red sauce that we put on hamburgers, perhaps. You have it with the fries, and here you might have other types of sauce, but it's the sauce. The idea is, in terms of Larry Summers, was finance never figures out if the bottle of ketchup is priced correctly. They just say, well, this bottle of ketchup is priced, 100,000 VND. So the next one, if there are 2 bottles, they should be priced 200 VND. So it's all relative pricing, relative risk. He challenged finance, and he says, well, we should try to figure out what the fundamental value is, and what the fund is this stock correctly priced, irrespective of what other stocks are priced at. Because otherwise you get booms and busts. We get huge run-ups in the stock market, which are followed by crashes. And some may argue whether this is inefficient or not, but many people think that there are, in fact, periods of bubbles or inefficiency in stock markets where prices can be above their fundamental value. So he was saying, let's challenge this to understand the fundamental value. So performance relative to industry benchmarks misses a bigger issue, in my opinion. What drives the industry benchmark? How do firms interact with each other? Industrial organization, this is a primary question, how they interact with each other. However, they do not consider the financial market implications. So they have a separate stream of literature which has been coexisting with finance, but different. So the theme is these 2 streams of literature, perhaps we need to reunite them into one bigger river. Here is the traditional structure, conduct, performance, and economics. You have structure, which might be viewed as exogenous. You have a monopoly, oligopoly, perfect competition. Then you have conduct. How do firms actually interact with each other? And finally, performance. The new industrial organization, dynamics are important. Structure and conduct are both endogenous. Firms' conduct affects the structure with an aid to impact performance. There are endogenous barriers to entry. Firms will behave in order to create barriers to entry to keep their competitors out. So we see a lot of competition now in many markets to grab the #1 market share. If it's ride sharing like Grab, if it's in the US we have Uber, in China we have Didi. Again, there's one company who's attempting to gain the full market share. And then, of course, keep the competitors out so they enjoy higher prices. And this is what worries regulators. So I have a challenge, which is we need the equivalent of the Digliani and Miller, MN, for competition in finance. So this is for competition in financial decisions. So we could say to our students, competition does not affect the interaction of finance in the real side decisions under the following decisions. So if you look at Digliani and Miller, they had 5 conditions. So I'm going to come up with 5 conditions for the competition in finance. 1, if financial structure cannot costlessly be adjusted and is not impacted by rival firms. Agency problems are not impacted by competition. Then competition doesn't matter. Firms take the actions of their rivals as given. Rival firms do not influence the net present value. Firms can adjust their physical capital stock without considering competitors. And stock prices equally reflect fundamentals in competitive and concentrated industries. So my challenge is, I do not believe these 5 factors hold. These 5 factors are a hypothetical, stylized universe under which finance can operate without considering competition. So if we look at these lists, we would say these do not hold. Therefore, we have to consider competition when advising firms about their financial structure. We have to consider competition when advising firms about their merger policy. So all of the things we typically worry about in finance, we have to actually think about how competition impacts these decisions. So I'm just going to go through these 5 conditions to show you some research which is being done, which shows that these 5 conditions do not hold, that we have to consider competition when evaluating corporate and asset pricing decisions. So can we adjust the financial structure of a firm costlessly? That's condition 1, that if we can ignore competition. So if we look at the evidence, there's a lot of evidence here, starting with Brander and Lewis in 1986, and then some of my own papers in 1995, very early on, and recently by Laurent Fassard in 2010. There's a lot of evidence which shows that, indeed, the competition environment impacts the financial structure, and we can use capital structure, can impact both my own firm and also the rival firm, the competitor firm. So that means when a firm, if I was giving advice to a CEO, when a firm chooses its financial structure, it should think about what is the financial structure of my rivals. If my rival has a very low debt, lots of money, I should worry that they may lower prices to try to drive me out of the market. They may, if they observe me having a lot of debt. The point is that I should avoid having high debt if I believe that the rival firm may, in fact, have the ability to lower their price and drive me out of the market. So if I was advising a firm in a competitive industry, I would say beware of adding debt because of the competition. So that is the first piece of advice. I tried to be very practical here, so I give some advice that can be used to advise CEOs or advise new firms. Condition 2, agency problems. That's a conflict of interest between the manager and the owners of the firm. Are these impacted by competition? There is theoretical and empirical work which shows that agency problems are impacted by competition. Corporate governance is impacted by competition. The good news is if you have high competition, that's going to be enough pressure on the manager, so they're going to feel an obligation to more maximize shareholder value, otherwise they will not survive. So there we do not have to worry about monitoring the manager as much in a highly competitive environment, because if they misbehave or not operate the firm towards shareholder value, they have the risk of going out of business. But this also says that shareholders need to watch very carefully in monopolistic markets where there are high cash flows and you have a more of a market-sheltered market position. The CEO can and tunnel money more likely out of those companies, or to do affiliated transactions and other mechanisms. So the board of directors has to be especially vigilant in concentrated industries, or industries in which there are barriers to entry. So again, competition matters to the board of directors and the shareholders on how closely they need to actually examine the firm. Cash and entry. Can firms use financial structure to prevent entry? So there are, in many cases, some examples which have said that firms will hold extra cash just to keep new firms from entering. And they will use that extra cash maybe even to buy the rival firm or undercut them on prices, the new entrants. The new entrant may not be able to survive. So this is why the competition authorities would want to look very carefully at existing firms and how they're behaving towards potential competitors. In the United States, Microsoft was the subject of many lawsuits. Now Google is now being potentially prosecuted because they have very big stocks of cash which they can use to outlast any potential entrant. I'm not going to go through, there's a very nice paper. I won't go through the whole paper here, I'll just point you to it, by Jerome and Mueller, which deals on this question. So this is not my work, it's Xavier Jerome and Holger Mueller. It published in the Journal of Financial Economics 2020. They have a whole paper which shows that competition impacts agency problems and the governance of firms. Well, I'm not going to go through these nice statistics, but I'm going to move on to condition 3. And you can again get a copy of this talk and you can refer back to those papers. So condition 3 is firms take their actions of their rivals as given. The NPV and the risk of my investment does not depend on my rival's investment. There are no races to invest, no strategic investment. Now, if you put this up, you'd say, of course that's not the case. We know that if I invest, I want to think about what my rival does. I need to consider this. I may have to race to win the prize in an R&D race. Then finance matters, how much cash you have matters. So you can out-survive in this kind of race for the patent or race for the market share. That happened in many countries with respect to the ride-sharing industry. It happened in other industries as well, where there are races to invest. Then having access to financing is crucial. There have been many writers who have stated that Uber was successful in the United States because they had more venture capital backing. They had more money. But when they went to China, they faced a rival, Didi, who had lots of money as well. And then Didi was able to survive, and actually Uber exited from China. Again, based on the cash availability and the financing. So Didi secured lots of extra financing because they knew that the competition with Uber would be very fierce. Lots of literature here. So recently in R&D games, I have a paper with Alexei Zdanov, and where firms invest more in R&D and threaten rivals because of the amount of cash they have and the ultimate prize. We have worked recently on mergers and product market synergies. So we're looking at how related firms are and how if they do merge, are they able to generate synergies. This differs for competitive and concentrated industries. If you think of the synergies themselves, there's a fundamental premise from a merger is that product market competition and synergy creation affect the incentives to merge. They also want to gain market share. So in many cases, by purchasing a firm, it is easier to gain market share than trying to just run them out of business through competition. But synergies are difficult to measure. So I'm going to move to the data side of my talk and talk a little bit how we can use data to measure things which are hard to, in many cases, measure previously. Why do profits increase for some mergers? There's many different explanations given in the literature. But competition is a fundamental reason which affects the likelihood of merging and the successful product introduction after the merger. So firms in larger clusters and so forth may have a high idea arrival, higher merger incidence. When I say clusters, it means there's a lot of firms in a particular area. So you'll see it initially in some areas of products where there's lots of firms, and eventually we see the equilibrium is only 1 to 2 firms survive. Maybe 4 firms, even globally. If you look at the number of steel companies, automobile companies, beer companies, even very simple companies like water companies, we'll see that there's sometimes some very large multinationals who are the ultimate survivors. So competition affects how the gains are shared from a merger. How large the mergers are, how the gains are. We can really think about the sharing of gains between targets and acquirers. Who gets the gain? That's a big finance question when we look at the excess returns to merging firms. What we're saying here is that competition affects how much the target gets and how much the acquirer gets in a merger's excess returns. One back here. A little too fast here. Okay. In all cases, identifying competition means knowing how close and closeness to who. To whom. So we have a bunch of tests we tested in one paper. I'm not going to go through the hypotheses. The one at the top is one where people say, well, high concentration, more profitability, but that hasn't held up in the literature historically. Because then they developed alternative hypotheses called limit pricing, which explains the lack of that positive relation. Turns out it was just a measurement problem. And in the data, we can show that high concentration does result in high profits. I'm going to show you how we do this. This is a new technique which we've been doing for the last 10 years approximately, where we take computational linguistics and then we use this to develop measures of closeness between firms. And then we subsequently examine merger outcomes, or we examine the cash and dividend policies. And recently we've even examined the risk properties of firms based on their closeness in the product space. So we take all the words used in the universe of 10Ks, and as I said, we're doing this now for Chinese equivalent of 10Ks and also European 10Ks. So we take all the words, and instead of deciding how close the competitors are, we would take the words just like, and then essentially like a word cloud, we would put a measure of closeness for how much overlap there is between two 10Ks in their product description. So here's an example of a merger. I got some nice graphs here. So here we have a merger which occurred between General Dynamics and Amphion in the green boxes. And you can see the other boxes are the competitors of these firms. So General Dynamics is in 372, they make military hardware. Amphion is in 737, they make software. But it turns out the software they make is actually software which pertains to the defense industry. So they make software which the defense industry uses in plane guidance systems. So the software industry now is heavily involved even in military hardware. And then you see some of the other companies. These companies were very successful in their merger because they were related, they were complementary to each other. So we showed this in the 10K text, that they were very complementary to each other in terms of relatedness, but yet they had SIC codes, traditional codes, that were quite different. 372, as you can see, in 737. So this is an example of very similar but different, and we would predict in our test this would be a very successful merger, and it was. Another one, which everyone probably is aware of this company, Walt Disney. We have Walt Disney, which operates in Hong Kong. We've got Hong Kong, we've got Shanghai Disney, right? We've got a whole bunch of Disneys. Now we have French Disney theme park. If you have kids, you may have seen some of the characters. But what you may not know is there's another company called Pixar, which makes like Toy Story. And again, this is really a test of if you don't have kids, you may not know of the Toy Story movies, but they're very, very popular with little toys. And they have many other movies which are done with computer. They actually produce those movies with computers. And they have people making voices. There's no people involved in the movies other than speaking. So it's all done with computers. So according to the standard text classification, Pixar is 781, which is computer augmented design. And so you would say, well, this would not be a successful merger because Disney Entertainment Company, which is also 737, which is a very broad category, is not that related based on the numerical classification. But with the 10K text, we showed they're in fact very related, and you and I, if we look at the companies, would say, yes. You tell me, Gordon, those are very related companies. And then based on our measure, this should be very successful, and it was. And then other companies on the other side, at the top you see P9, which is Pixar's ninth closest competitor based on our measure. That was in 679. So that's Marvel Entertainment. Well, Marvel Entertainment makes movies. They make comic books, but they were classified as miscellaneous entertainment. So is that related? That turns out Disney bought them, and also very successful merger. And then Lucas Technologies, they bought a bunch of companies which they know are related, but according to our standard measures of industry classifications from way back from Leontief, Wesley Leontief developed the classification measures, which somehow persisted for 200 years. So our challenge on the data side is We don't need to use these old 0-1 binary classification methods where you're in an industry or not. We can actually use text-based similarity measures to understand the complementarities and relatedness of firms. So the important thing is with this method, we can identify competitors very accurately that are not identified as competitors in the product text. So we can measure the competition. Given we can measure the competition, then we can give advice to the CEOs. We can give advice to the CEOs on how you choose your financial structure based on what your competitors are doing and how much cash your competitors have. I'm not going to go through the tables. The conclusion is it really does matter. Measuring competition matters. That's going to be the overall conclusion. Synergies and competition both matter. So you can think about the potential synergies, and then you also want to think about the competition to understand those mergers. So the best mergers are ones with higher exposed cash flows and new product introductions when they have similar acquirer and target, with targets that are farther away from your closest rivals so they can differentiate you from your competitors. That have unique, hard-to-replicate assets. Then you can make new products. Similar but different is the theme. And that has been the nature of successful mergers like Disney's purchases. Apple had a number of purchases the same name. So we can measure how successful they're likely to be. So when we advise a CEO, should you take over this company or not, we like to have companies that are similar but different enough from our existing competitors so we can differentiate ourselves and have higher cash flows in the future. Condition 4 about how they can adjust their capital structure. It implies risk factors are similar and competitive in concentrated industries. Recent work has shown equity risk is quite different in competitive and concentrated industries. So we need to think about this. This is my challenge to the asset pricing or the mutual fund managers. To understand the risk that firms face, you have to understand competition as well. We have a paper which came out in the JFQA, which also talks about this in terms of risk factors in product market competition environments. Condition 5, which is the last condition, is that stock prices equally reflect information in both competitive and concentrated industries. And here my challenge is that's not the case, because we will see that in fact, stock prices can be more informative when there are more competitors to observe. When there are less competitors, it's harder to get the information. You have to study those few firms very carefully. So there's recent work which deals with this. Well, I just highlight one paper, which I'm not going to go through. It's published by Joel Perez, one of my favorites, and won a Best Paper Prize in the Journal of Finance. It is about product market competition, insider trading, and stock market efficiency. So here, again, it's product market competition was central, and Joel showed that, in fact, it impacted drastically the risk-return properties of firms. And he showed here is that market power, it's very interesting, you have higher informativeness, and that was his whole point, is you actually then get, if you take bigger firms here, you get, in fact, again, higher informativeness. We have a paper which also looks at real and financial industry booms and busts, which I'd like to read. And the idea here is, can we look at the cycles in the stock market and understand the cycles, the booms and the busts? And these, we show in this paper, are impacted by competition. Again, the theme of the talk. Outcomes are different in competitive and concentrated industries. In competitive industries, we found that there's more overinvestment and more negative alphas. So if I'm in a competitive industry, the central theme was, I can't just sit on the sidelines and say, well, I'm just not going to invest because I know it's competitive. My returns on my existing capital are going to be driven down by competitors. And so we do show that in fact, investment has a negative return in competitive industries for most firms. And this is a big negative return. These were stock market abnormal stock returns or alphas in a multiple factor model. So what are the research possibilities? And I'll end. We still don't know what the bigger picture is overall. We have some good ideas about how to give advice to managers if you're in a competitive or concentrated industry, what financial structure you should use. So I'm saying to consultants and people who give advice to CEOs or CEOs themselves that they do need to think about competition before they make these decisions. And I think successful CEOs know this. And in strategy, people know this, but people in finance have typically not fully considered the impact of competition. So there are a lot of research possibilities which I would like to give to scholars, new budding scholars who are out there trying to publish papers and examine things. There's lots of research already been done in finance already, so we want to try to think about areas which are relatively unexplored. Despite the papers I have presented here, the impact of competition on corporate finance and asset pricing is still relatively unexplored. If you're a PhD student, you would see there's thousands of papers on capital structure. But capital structure and competition, maybe there's 10. So there's room for many more. If I look at corporate governance and competition, there are many, many, many papers, hundreds of papers, thousands of papers already written in that area. How many to deal with competition and corporate governance? Maybe 3. Much more room there for new scholars to work. So do firms use cash and other financial policies to impact competition in the future? We don't really know how, but we think they do from anecdotal evidence, from the stories I told you about Uber, stories I tell you about Didi. It seems very plausible, but has not yet been systematically documented. Are changes in industry competition associated with changes in industry financial policies, corporate policies? We think they are. We don't fully know the extent. We do explore this recently in a paper in 2016, where we look at endogenous competition and how firms invest in advertising and research and development to impact competition, to impact their own future competitors. I'm not going to go through this, the whole thing here, but again, we have this automated way of forming new industry groups, which I highlight to everyone. And we made a handout, which is in your folder for the registration, where you can find more information and more of the data available. So we have a bunch of things there. Here's some more research possibilities. We want to think about different stages of industries. You may have a different capital structure, which is optimal in the growth industry, growth stage, consolidation stage, stability stage, and decline stage. Again, the stage of the industry. If it's a new industry, you're going to have a different financial and capital structure than if it's an older industry that has already been in existence for a long time. So I look at the automobile industry and compare it to the ride-sharing industry. You'd say, well, they both deal with cars, but one is the production of cars, or autonomous vehicles now is a new industry, still deals with cars, but you might have a different prediction for the financial structure and the firms which deal in ride-sharing and autonomous vehicles than you would for the traditional manufacture of cars. We can think of the risk properties. If I think of the risk properties of the traditional asset-heavy industries like car manufacture, compare those to the risk properties of asset-light industries like ride-sharing, which you do over app, or Grab, you do over the app. Those are asset-light industries. You're going to have different risk properties. And given those risk properties of the assets, you'll probably have a different financial structure. So all this data is available for download, recently updated, as I said, and we'll be backfilling all the way to 87 for the United States. Again, probably within the next 2 years, we'll have the Chinese version available, and hopefully we can add the Vietnamese to that and some other Asian countries as well. So specifying, let me summarize the talk, specifying industry structure and competition is fundamental. Competitors are not just benchmarks. Firms choose financial policy to interact with each other. Industry competition is not just an alternative disciplining device or control variable. Competition is a fundamental state variable which impacts viable governance structures, viable compensation systems, viable financing structure, and the risk and survival of firms. I think everywhere in the world we're interested in these questions. The risk and survival of firms and how well the firms do relative to their competitors. So when we give advice as corporate finance or asset pricing professionals and educators, we can build in the effect of competition. So I have a course which I teach, a PhD course. You're welcome to visit the syllabus. It's on my website. It's been updated, full information. And this, the last slide was again just thanking our organizers, and I'm all done at this point. So I give you my warmest thanks. It's a great honor to speak to you, and I hope this proved useful in your future research endeavors. Thank you.